Smart cat keeps scratching at police station door when officers follow him. They start crying. Officer Sarah Jenkins wasn't expecting anything unusual during her midnight shift at the Riverside police station. The small town rarely saw much action after dark, and she was catching up on paperwork when she heard the scratching at the station's front door. Probably another raccoon, she muttered, but protocol required her to investigate any noise. When she opened the door, she found herself staring into the intense green eyes of a gray tabby cat. The cat, surprisingly well-groomed for a stray, didn't run. Instead it meowed urgently and paced back and forth in front of her. Something about its behavior struck Sarah as odd. This wasn't a hungry stray looking for food. The cat seemed desperate. "Hey there, little one," Sarah said, kneeling down. The cat immediately ran a few feet away, then stopped and looked back at her, meowing even more insistently. Sarah had seen enough police movies to recognize the classic follow me behavior, but surely that only happened in films. The cat repeated its performance, this time more urgently. "Mike," she called to her partner, "you're going to think I'm crazy, but I think this cat wants us to follow it." Officer Mike Rodriguez peered out from his desk. "You've been watching too many Lassie reruns, Jenkins." The cat suddenly darted inside the station, grabbed Sarah's sleeve in its teeth, and pulled. The behavior was so deliberate that even Mike stood up, coffee forgotten in his hand. "This is definitely going in the weird calls log," Mike said, grabbing his jacket. They decided to follow the cat, which was now leading them down Maple Street with determined strides. Every few yards it would stop, look back to ensure they were following. Then continues. Sarah radioed in their situation dispatch, "This is Jenkins. Rodriguez and I are following a feline informant location heading east on Maple toward the old warehouse district." "Copy that." Jenkins came the dispatcher bemused voice. "Did you say feline informant?" The cat led them past darkened storefronts and quiet homes. Its gray fur almost invisible in the shadows. As they entered the warehouse district, both officers instinctively placed their hands on their weapons. This area had been largely abandoned since the textile mill closed 15 years ago. The cat stopped at a rusty chain-link fence surrounding the old Riverside cotton mill. A sign reading "No trespassing. Dangerous structure" hung crookedly on the gate. "I don't like this," Mike muttered, switching on his flashlight. The cat squeezed through a gap in the fence and waited expectantly. Sarah found a section where the fence had been cut. "Someone's been here recently," she noted, examining the clean cuts in the metal. "These aren't old." As they stepped through the gap, both officers were struck by an overwhelming sense of dread. The abandoned mill loomed above them, its broken windows like hollow eyes in the moonlight. The cat led them to a side door slightly ajar. Fresh scratches marked the metal near the handle. "Cat height scratches. This gets weirder by the minute," Mike said, drawing his weapon. Sarah did the same, and they entered the building following their unusual guide. The beam of their flashlights cut through thick layers of dust, revealing rusted machinery and debris. Their footsteps echoed ominously against the concrete floor while the cat moved silently ahead, its tail straight up like a signal flag. "The air smells wrong," Sarah whispered, covering her nose. There was something beyond the usual musty abandonment smell, something chemical and sharp. The cat led them past empty storage rooms and along a corridor where old cotton processing machines stood like prehistoric skeletons. Then it stopped abruptly, its ears pricked forward and let out a low growl. They heard it, then a faint whimpering sound coming from behind a heavy metal door. The cat scratched at the door frantically, leaving fresh marks among dozens of older ones. Mike tried the handle locked, he muttered, shining his light on the padlock. "But this is new. Everything else in here is ancient, but this lock." Sarah radioed their position dispatch, requesting backup at the old cotton mill. Possible situation developing. She kept her voice low, though something told her whoever was behind that door already knew they were there. The whimpering grew louder, and now they could make out words. "Please help, stand back," Mike said, raising his boot. The lock broke on the third kick, the sound echoing through the empty building like a gunshot. As the door swung open, both officers staggered back in horror. Their flashlights revealed a makeshift laboratory, tables covered with chemical equipment, bottles of prescription medications, and what looked like drug manufacturing supplies. But what made their blood run cold was what they saw. In the corner, huddled on a dirty mattress, were 5 teenagers, all Bound with zip ties, their faces were pale and gaunt, suggesting they'd been there for days. Among them was Jenny Thompson, who had been reported missing 2 weeks ago from the neighboring town. The gray tabby cat immediately ran to one of the girls, a thin blonde who looked no more than 15. The cat began rubbing against her, purring loudly. "That's that Smokey," the girl whispered, her voice cracking. "He's my cat. I didn't think anyone would notice the signs of. I taught him." Sarah quickly radioed for immediate backup and medical assistance while Mike began cutting the zip ties. "You taught your cat to get help?" he asked, trying to keep the teenagers calm while assessing their condition. "I've had Smokey since he was a kitten," the girl explained, tears running down her face as she reached for her pet with trembling hands. "I taught him tricks like fetching and leading people. When they grabbed me from the park, he followed. He's been bringing us water bottles he finds and trying to get someone to follow him." The full horror of the situation became clear as they freed the teenagers. The criminals had been using them as test subjects for their new drug formulations. Empty syringes littered the floor and medical monitoring equipment beeped softly in the corner. "They'll be back soon," Jenny Thompson warned her, voice shaking. "They always come back at 2 a.m. to check the results." Sarah checked her watch. 1:47 a.m. Sarah's radio crackled with confirmation that backup was 5 minutes out, but they might not have 5 minutes. The sound of a vehicle pulling up outside echoed through the empty building. "Might get them to safety," Sarah whispered urgently. "Use the back exit we passed. I'll stall them." The cat Smokey suddenly tensed, his ears flattening against his head. They could hear footsteps approaching. At least three people. Mike began quietly guiding the teenagers toward the back exit, but the girl with the cat hesitated. "Smokey, come," she whispered. The cat didn't move. Instead, Smokey positioned himself near the door, crouching low like he was hunting. Sarah understood the cat was going to help her. By time the footsteps grew closer, Sarah took position behind an old piece of machinery, her weapon ready. The door creaked open and through 3 men entered, their flashlight beams sweeping the room. "What the hell? The lock's broken," one man shouted. That's when Smokey made his move. He launched himself at the first man's legs, claws extended, yowling like a demon. The man screamed in surprise, stumbling backward into his companions. Their flashlights went flying, plunging the room into darkness except for the dim light from the corridor. Sarah seized her moment. "Police, drop your weapons." The chaos that followed was a blur of shouts, scuffling, and the continued warfare of one very angry cat. Smokey was everywhere, scratching, biting, and creating the perfect distraction for Sarah to maintain control until backup arrived. The sound of sirens and screeching tires outside announced the arrival of backup. The 3 men were quickly subdued. Despite their attempts to escape, one of them had deep scratches across his face, courtesy of Smokey, who sat calmly grooming himself. Once the suspects were handcuffed as more officers flooded the building, the true scope of the operation became clear. This wasn't just a drug lab, it was part of a larger human trafficking ring that had been operating across 3 states. The teenagers had been abducted to test new synthetic drugs before they were sold on the streets. "You know, it's crazy," Mike said later as paramedics treated the victims. "If it wasn't for that cat, we might never have found this place. These guys were careful. No paper trail, no digital footprint." The girl, whose name was Amy Collins, held Smokey close as she was checked by medical personnel. "I got him from a shelter last year," she explained. "Everyone said he was too smart for his own good. He used to open doors and turn on faucets at home, so I started teaching him tricks. I never thought it would save my life." News crews began arriving there, cameras focusing on the unlikely hero. Smokey seemed to know he was the center of attention, sitting regally on the hood of a police car, his gray first silvered by the flashing lights. The story spread like wildfire. Hero cat leads police to secret drug lab and saves 5 teens. Animal welfare organizations called it one of the most remarkable cases of animal intelligence and loyalty they'd ever seen. In the weeks that followed, the case became national news. Smokey appeared on morning shows demonstrating his remarkable intelligence by performing the tricks Amy had taught him. Animal behaviorists studied his unique ability to understand complex commands and his extraordinary decision to seek help from authorities. What's truly remarkable, Dr. Patricia Martinez, a leading animal behaviorist, told reporters, is that this cat didn't just know something was wrong, he specifically Chose to go to a police station he understood that's where help could be. Found the investigation revealed a devastating truth: the criminal organization had been operating for years using abandoned industrial sites. Across the country, Amy and the other teenagers had been targeted because they seemed unlikely to be missed. Most came from troubled homes or were considered runaways. 3 months after the rescue, Smokey received the ASPCA's Cat of the Year award. He sat perfectly still as they placed a tiny medal around his neck, then proceeded to charm everyone at the ceremony by performing his repertoire of tricks. "He's not just my pet anymore," Amy said during the ceremony, tears in her eyes. "He's my guardian angel. When I was losing hope in that horrible place, he would bring me water bottles and rub against me like he was promising he'd find a way to help." Officer Sarah Jenkins was promoted to detective largely due to her instinct to trust the cat. That night she kept a framed photo on her desk of Smokey sitting on the police car looking as proud as any decorated officer. The old cotton mill was demolished 6 months later, erasing the physical reminder of the horrors it had contained in its place. The city built a youth center and, at Amy's suggestion, an adjacent animal shelter named Smokey Safe Haven. "We want to focus on training shelter cats," Amy explained at the opening ceremony. "People think only dogs can be service animals or help in law enforcement, but Smokey proved that cats are capable of extraordinary things." The shelter developed a special program teaching cats basic command responses and rescue behaviors. Police departments across the country began considering the potential of feline assistance in certain types of investigations, particularly in places where cats could go unnoticed. Smokey himself became a regular visitor at local schools where Amy would share their story and teach children about personal safety. The greedy tabby would demonstrate his intelligence by performing increasingly complex tasks, always ending with his signature move, leading a volunteer through a series of obstacles to find a hidden object. "What makes Smokey special isn't just his intelligence," Officer Sarah Jenkins told a class of wide-eyed elementary school students. "It's that he chose to be brave. When it mattered most, he could have run away or hidden, but he chose to help the other teenagers rescued that night slowly recovered from their ordeal." Jenny Thompson, who had been held the longest, credited Smokey's nightly visits with helping her maintain hope. "He would bring us bits of food he found, clean water bottles, even small toys. Sometimes it was like he was telling us not to give up." 1 year after the rescue, all 5 teenagers gathered at Smokey's Safe Haven for a special reunion. The shelter had already placed over 200 cats in loving homes, with a special focus on matching intelligent cats with people who needed emotional support or assistance. "Watch this," Amy said proudly. As Smokey demonstrated his newest skill, the cat methodically checked a line of backpacks, stopping at one that contained a hidden packet of artificial drugs. The local police department had started using him to train their KN units, proving that cats could be valuable partners in detection work. The criminal organization's leaders were sentenced to life in prison, their network finally dismantled. During the trial, prosecutors had presented Smokey's actions as evidence of how obvious the criminal activity had been. Even a cat knew something was wrong and sought help. "People ask me if I'm still afraid," Amy told a reporter during the reunion, "but how can I be? Every night Smokey sleeps on my pillow purring. He's like my personal security system. If he's not worried, I know everything's okay." The other survivors had also found healing through working with animals. Jenny became a veterinary student specializing in feline behavior. 2 others volunteered at Smokey's Safe Haven, helping to train both cats and potential adopters. Officer Sarah Jenkins, now Detective Jenkins, made it a point to visit the shelter regularly. "Every time I see a stray cat now I pay attention," she said. "Smokey taught us that sometimes help comes from unexpected places and we need to be ready to listen." Today, 10 years later, Smokey's legacy lives on, though the heroic cat passed away peacefully at the age of 15. His remarkable story continues to inspire change. The Smokey Protocol, a police procedure for responding to unusual animal behavior, has been adopted by departments nationwide. 3 cases of criminal activity have been discovered because officers followed persistent cats trying to draw attention to suspicious situations. Amy, now a renowned Animal behaviorist runs Smokey's safe haven alongside her private practice. The shelter has expanded to 3 locations, each specializing in training cats for different support roles, from emotional therapy to assistance for people with disabilities. People used to laugh when I told them cats could be trained like dogs. Amy says watching a group of shelter cats practice basic commands, but Smokey proved that cats don't just have the ability, they have the heart for it. 2 In the shelter's main hall, a bronze statue of Smokey sits atop a pedestal. His tail is curved gracefully around his paws, his head held high, exactly how he looked that night on the police car. The plaque below reads, "Some angels have whiskers, some heroes have paws, some miracles," per Detective Sarah Jenkins. Now close to retirement, still keeps that old photo on her desk. "It reminds me that hope can appear in the strangest forms," she explains. "Sometimes it's not the obvious hero who saves the day, sometimes it's just a gray tabby cat who refuses to give up." Every year on the anniversary of the rescue, people gather at Smokey's safe haven to celebrate what one determined cat accomplished. Children bring their pets, shelter cats show off their training, and survivors share their stories. The event always ends at sunset with dozens of cats and their human companions sitting together watching the sky turn golden. "You know what Smokey really taught us?" Amy asks, her hand resting on the bronze statue. "He showed us that love doesn't need words to change the world. Sometimes all it needs is a brave heart for pause and the courage to ask for help." As the sun sets on another anniversary celebration, a new group of shelter cats practices their training in the yard. Among them, a young gray tabby masters the lead and guide command, his green eyes bright with intelligence. In the growing dusk, he looks just like Smokey did that fateful night, proving that while some stories end, their spirit lives on in those who follow.